I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker. I'm super excited about his talk. Chris Simon, who's going to be talking about AI.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me here this morning. So what do we mean when we say AI? Obviously, AI is a very broad field. We can go right back to Eliza in 1967, the classic psychoanalytic chatbot that just responded to every answer with another question. Why do you think you feel that way? Right through a whole bunch of very interesting technology developments up until the modern era of the GPTs. But it all started the modern era in 2017 with the development of the transformer model. And what was quite interesting here is that they had actually been working on translation software, and they had developed this thing called an attention mechanism to help contextualize the words that they were translating, because literal translations, as you'll know if you speak two languages, don't quite work out. So you need some context to understand how to translate it. And then, so they developed this thing called a generative pre-trained transformer, which is where the acronym GPT comes from. This attention mechanism was made quite popular through this paper, Attention is All You Need, because they had realized that if they got rid of some of the other aspects of the system that was doing the translation and just focused on the attention mechanism, it actually started to just emit plausible-looking text, stuff that felt like it would be something that a human might write. So this was published, and in it they sort of coined the phrase large language model, and that's really, let's be honest, what we're here to talk about today. Large language models have come to dominate the story of AI, and certainly most of my talk today is about large language models. And what we're going to be doing today is a two-sided analysis of the use of large language models. I'm addressing an audience of engineers, people who are most likely being put in a position where OpenAI launched and all of a sudden your product owners added 50 items to your backlog. Add the AI, add it. Can we have some of this AI in our product? So you've got a product, you've got to get the AI from somewhere, get the magic AI, and I call this the supply side of your product, and we'll be looking at the ethics of the supply side. And then hopefully your product now produces some of that sparkly magic pixie dust for your customers. But here we need to take a look at risk. What's actually going to happen to your customers and to your business as a result of including this product? Now, I'm definitely not focusing in on is there any utility in these tools? I know a lot of people are getting a lot of value out of them. A lot of people are using them to augment their coding practices or for other purposes, and more power to you if that's the case. But this is very much a look at the ethics and the risk of incorporating these tools into your products. So what do I mean by ethics and risk? On the one side, we have ethics, and the other side, risk. So ethics is all about moral problems. It's about balancing the benefits and harms to individuals and society. No one can really tell you what's right here. It's a personal choice for you. On the risk side, we've got things that probably should be on your business's risk register, things that might harm your business's financial success or get you into other kinds of legal trouble. Probably your business has a risk register. I don't know if many of you pay attention to it, but it's the kind of thing you probably should, and particularly in this arena. When we talk about supply-side ethics, we're particularly focusing on a branch of ethics called applied ethics, where we're applying philosophy to examine concrete moral problems in real-life situations. And I'm drawing particularly on a sub-branch of that, which is professional ethics. We might think of professional ethics in the context of medicine or law, but I think we should be thinking about it more and more in the context of engineering and software engineering. Indeed, the Engineers Australia has a code of ethics and guidelines on professional conduct. Formally speaking, it applies to members of Engineers Australia, which I would probably guess, given the way things have been going in the software industry, most of the people here are not members. But that doesn't mean you can't read the code of ethics and consider whether it applies to you. And as you can see here, it's about focusing on creating engineering solutions for a sustainable future, striving to serve the community ahead of other personal or sectional interests. So I want you to keep that definition in mind as we go through these topics. We're going to be looking at what I call the synthetic media supply chain. So we talk about large language models, they emit text. One term that I quite like for that text is synthetic media, as opposed to natural media. So we've got synthetic media. We have an LLM emitting synthetic media into our products that we're using, and there's a supply chain there. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. This product is created, and there's a bunch of factors that come into making it possible for you to consume it. The first one we're going to be looking at is the data itself that feeds into these models. It's not the only source of data, but a major source of data in these models is a thing called Common Crawl. Who's heard of Common Crawl? Anyone come across it? So Common Crawl, it maintains a free open repository of web crawl data that can be used by anyone. It indexes 2.8 billion pages of the internet, 410 terabytes of uncompressed content. Every couple of months, they scan the internet and try and gather as much content as they can. Now, it's certainly not the whole internet. It's a sort of a representative sample as best as they can. But it's a lot of data, and it's a huge chunk of the training data for many of today's LLMs. Now, the question, of course, comes to mind, surely some of that content is copyright. What is going on with the use of this copyright material in training large language models? Well, the thing about Common Crawl is that it was originally produced for research purposes. And so under research purposes, there's a thing called fair use, which means that you're actually allowed to use copyright material if you're using it for such purposes as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. And by far and away, the largest use of the Common Crawl in the AI space was for research. We had academics and institutions using Common Crawl to help them advance the state of the art in this LLM technology. Indeed, in 2017, Sarah Krauss, the director of Common Crawl, said this is big data intended for machine learning readability. Further, our intention is its use for public benefit to encourage research and innovation, not direct consumption. So I have a lot of respect for Common Crawl, but I think there's a real shame here, which is that it has been used for purposes it was not originally intended. And to be really clear about what I mean by that, there's this great paper, Quantifying Memorization Across Neural Language Models, that proves that even though these training data sets are being fed into the machine and supposedly emitting text, there's getting evidence that more and more, and as the models get larger, they're actually just memorizing this text, and they're able to emit it exactly as it is. So I think there can be no doubt that this source material is in there. We can see it coming out under the right conditions. And so, sorry, we've got a pop-up here that's not supposed to be there. But Sam Altman, in the House of Lords Communications and Digital Select Committee, actually admitted that they're training on copyright material. But what he believes, is that copyright law does not forbid the training. So he believes that it is copyright, but he's allowed to do it under the fair use doctrine. But just let's remember what the fair use doctrine is for. Criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. Does anyone think OpenAI is using it under the fair use doctrine? They are making a profit, or maybe not making a profit, but they're certainly making some revenue. And personally for me, they're not making it under the fair use doctrine. So what this has led to is a whole bunch of lawsuits. We've got New York Times in 2023 updating the terms of use to prohibit machine learning models. OpenAI finally developed blocking of certain such things if people said they didn't want to be scanned by them. Then we have New York Times asking Common Crawl to remove their content. And then we start getting the lawsuits. 20th September, Authors Guild, representing a bunch of lawyers, sues OpenAI. 27th of December, New York Times sues OpenAI and Microsoft. And it goes on. We've got 8 newspapers owned by Media News Group and Tribune suing Microsoft and OpenAI. Universal Music Group suing music-generating companies. 3 authors suing Anthropic, and a YouTuber suing OpenAI, NVIDIA, and Google. Now, you might say these are opportunistic lawsuits, but I think that they're the vanguard of people realizing that they're being ripped off. We've got commercial entities stealing copyright material, using it to generate revenue, and pretending that it's under the fair use doctrine. And for me, this is definitely an ethical question that we all need to consider. Is it ethical to profit from the use of a service that was created illegally? And while you're considering this, you might like to be aware that the median full-time author income in 2022 was just barely over $20,000, including book and other author-related activities. While 10% of authors earn far above the median, half earn even less. I'm guessing most of the people in this room earn a little bit more than $20,000 a year. What else do we have in the synthetic media supply chain? We have a group of people collectively known as data workers. Now, this is something that I think a lot of people are unfortunately not aware of as part of the supply chain here. And now what's going on? We've got our data feeding into the large language model. We just talked about that. We're trying to produce our AI magic pixie dust. But what they found is when it first started coming out, what we're getting is the raw internet. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been on the internet. It's pretty rubbish. There's a lot of crap out there that they didn't want their customers exposed to. So they got these data workers and said, you need to check what's coming out of here, tell me if it's safe or not, and feed that back into the model as part of a human reinforcement training process. Now, this all sounds well and good. They're doing the responsible thing. They're trying to protect their customers from harmful content, until you learn about how they're treating these data workers. So Time reported that OpenAI used Kenyan workers on less than $2 an hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. This was through a company called Sama, who's developed quite a reputation and expertise in data labeling and other aspects of data work for AI, where they effectively act as an outsourced agent for these companies and abstract for them the exploitative conditions that are happening. This is the first of a couple of content warnings I have in this presentation. I do apologize, but if you would prefer not to read a graphic description that may disturb you, I encourage you to look away. I'm about to remove the black text, and I'll just stay silent for a moment while everyone can read the text. So if you prefer not to read it, please look away now. So I'm going to move on here, but as you can see there, that traumatic work led to some actually cancelling their contract with OpenAI because their staff were being treated so badly with limited recourse and extremely low wages. There was a great paper published doing some research into this, and its analysis revealed alarming accounts of low wages, insecure work, tightly disciplined labour management process, gender-based exploitation and harassment, and a system designed to extract value from low-paid workers to produce profits for investors. What we have here is the digital sweatshop that is hidden behind the OpenAI facade. Thankfully, there's some work being done. The Data Workers Inquiry has formed, effectively a group of people that are organising in some countries that have been targeted by this and trying to fight for their rights and to get the protections that they need. They don't mind doing the work, they just want it to be paid fairly and for it to be safe for them and them to be supported in the doing of it. But at this point in time, considering that all commercial LLM products have utilised such services, is it ethical to profit from the use of a service that exploits the most vulnerable in its construction? Finally, the third of the synthetic media elements that we're going to talk about today is the energy usage. Now, this is a tricky one. I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscape pre-DeepSeek, and then we'll talk about the post-DeepSeek landscape of energy consumption. So obviously, we've got our data, and we're training that data into the LLM. This is what's called the training energy consumption. And then we have people asking queries of the LLM, and in the production of the responses, we have what's called the inference energy. So when you're thinking about energy usage of LLMs, it's important to distinguish between the training energy, which is sort of a once-off cost. It's very large, but it's once-off, and then the inference energy, which is a continual energy usage to actually operate the model. And what we're seeing is, depending on the parameter sizes, we're talking about 55 megawatts per hour, 55 megawatt hours, sorry, up to 1,337 megawatt hours. And in comparison, the numbers actually don't look that bad. We've got 7 annual households for a 7 billion parameter model, 171 households for a 100 billion parameter model. I mean, considering that model is now being used by the whole world and supposedly generating lots of value for people, what's the big deal of 171 households of energy going into the training? Then we look at the inference energy. We've got 0.1 megawatt hour per 1 million queries times estimates of the numbers. We're doing 122 gigawatt hours per year. Again, big numbers, but some of the skeptics around the AI usage are sort of saying, but hang on, let's compare this to things like airline travel or meat production or shipping and so on. And, you know, on the balance, it's not so bad. But notwithstanding that, it's the absolute massive utilization of these products that is leading to the problems that we're seeing. And so there's a whole bunch of news reports out here. US electric utilities predicting surge in power demand, data centers soon becoming a scourge for the energy industry, generative AI energy problem today is foundational. We've got these forecasts of Gen AI demand forecasts skyrocketing between the training energy and the inference energy consumption. And I think that, you know, notwithstanding comparisons with other industries and other energy usages, this is definitely something that we should be paying attention to. Now let's look at the DeepSeek thing, because even with those energy usage numbers, back in January when DeepSeek was announced, everyone was very excited. They've slashed the energy demand, slashed the cost of training. And at first, this gave me some hope. Gave me some hope that at least on this particular topic, LLMs were going to be less of a problem than they had been. Nothing sort of illustrates what this impact this had more than the NVIDIA share price on the day that DeepSeek was announced. But there's a couple of factors going on here that we need to think about. And one is, as I said, just the sheer volume of usage, both on the inference side and the training side. We don't really just have one or two models. We've got companies all over the world training private models. On Olama, there's 176 model types and counting with multiple parameter counts, multiple versions. Each one of those takes that training data or that training energy over and over again, and we've got ever-growing usage of it. And the ever-growing usage of it hooks into a thing called Jevons paradox, which is even as you make things more efficient, If the trade-off then leads to a disproportionate growth in demand, you actually end up growing the gross usage. And so Jevon was working in the 1800s talking about coal utilization, but what we can see here is for a $20 reduction in the cost of fuel, they were seeing a 20% reduction in cost of fuel, we're seeing a 40% increase in usage. And this is actually what's playing out in AI. All of the efficiency gains are being offset by the increased utilization, generated demand as a result of the reduction in cost, which is actually leading to that ever-increasing need for energy and the big companies starting to plan more and more data centers and so on. So now we have, after a little bit of analysis, people starting to publish headlines like this: DeepSeek might not be such good news for energy after all, and the Jevons paradox suggests it might make things worse. So look, wherever you stand on the energy usage, whether you, like me, are concerned about it or you think it's not a big deal compared to other things and the growing production of renewable energy sources, my personal ethical stance on it is to really ponder seriously this question. Is it ethical to pursue technologies that have only ever-increasing net energy consumption in an era of climate catastrophe? And while you're pondering this, I invite you to take a look at the August mean temperature anomaly chart of Australia from 1910 to 2024. So that's the ethics side. Let's look at the risk side. The side where your product is out there in the market, it's engaging with customers, and now you've got these lovely AI magic features. Maybe you're building chatbots or text review summarization, communication support, coding support, AI companions, assessments of candidates in recruitment scenarios, personalization, image classification or image generation. So many different applications for this technology. It's hard not to get excited about it. But the thing that we take into account with risk is that risk is made up of two factors. We've got the consequence, so the impact of the risk should it occur, and we have the likelihood. So much like on the ethics side, we were considering all those ethical considerations through the lens of professional ethics and balancing the benefits and harms to society. On the risk side, when you're thinking about risk for your companies, consider both the consequence and the likelihood. And what this means, as I referred to earlier, is that you hopefully have a risk register where your company is assessing the impact or the risk assessment, which is a combination. So the more certain the likelihood and the more catastrophic the harm should be considered a very high risk. If it's a rare likelihood and a low harm, you can probably consider it a minor risk. So very much this is a probabilistic guess about the future. How likely is this thing going to happen and how bad would it be if it did? And that's the lens that we need to be looking at these risks through as we go into it. So the first one we're looking at is embedded bias. There's a whole bunch of axes on which these LLMs are biased because, as I said, they've consumed the whole internet, which is pretty awful, and is full of people who are emitting biased text, and that text is now feeding into the weights in the model. So what we're seeing here is things like AI generating covertly racist decisions about people based on their dialect. Even though they did all of that training and human reinforcement learning to try and make them more safe, what the researchers have found is what they're calling covert bias, covert racism, covert sexism. And so the way they discovered this was quite interesting. Instead of just asking, what kind of person is someone from a particular country, they said, if someone speaks like this, what kind of characteristics would you ascribe to them? So someone that speaks like a Western English person would say, I'm so happy when I wake up. They're characterized as brilliant and intelligent. And someone who speaks in African American vernacular is characterized as dirty, lazy, and stupid. This is clearly not the kind of thing that we want baked into a model that is making decisions or emitting text that our customers are going to be consuming. On the gender side, UNESCO studies revealed alarming evidence of regressive gender stereotypes. We see associations between women working in domestic roles far more often than men. So much so that this classic paper, Man is to Computer Programmer as Woman is to Homemaker, highlighted that in some of these vector models, we were seeing on the she side homemaker, nurse, receptionist, on the he side maestro, skipper, and protege. Talk about setting back decades of progress in equity and equality. To have this data from the last 100 years feeding into the models and basically putting us back in a far earlier era of consideration of human rights and values. This is an incredible example. Elizabeth Loraki posted on LinkedIn. She was talking at a conference and she saw an ad with her photo and something didn't look right. So the photo on the left was her original that she uploaded. They cropped it for the digital production of the conference agenda, and then they wanted to produce a print copy, but they'd lost the original. So they fed it into an AI mechanism for extending the image. Can everyone spot the difference? It's quite subtle, but this is the kind of stuff that is feeding out there. In her original image, she's wearing a shirt that she would be comfortable in In the image on the right, obviously the shirt is pulled apart and you can see her bra. Why? Why is this in there? Well, we know why. It's because that's what is on the internet, and that's what's been fed into this. And so what we're really doing when we use these models is we're exposing ourselves to a very uncontrolled set of data, an uncontrolled set of value judgments that are being baked into the outputs that we're relying on. In the US, they produced a thing called the Algorithmic Accountability Act in 2019. Unfortunately, in recent times, some of this stuff is being wound back under the current administration. But what we do have in Australia as well is some real progress in legislative and regulatory frameworks to try and address this. So in 2020, Ed Santow, the Australian Human Rights Commissioner at the time, said that algorithmic bias can cause real harm. It can lead to a person being unfairly treated or even suffering unlawful discrimination on the basis of characteristics such as their race, age, sex, or disability. Now, I've highlighted the words unlawful discrimination there, because whatever you do, whoever acts in a discriminatory fashion in your company, whether it's a human or an LLM, your company is being unlawful. And so the key point here is that it doesn't matter what technology you use, you're still subject to the legislative and regulatory frameworks of society. And that includes things like anti-discrimination. So the question from a risk perspective is to ask your businesses, when you're being asked to put AI into your product, where do these risks of embedded biases in generated synthetic media, evaluation roles, or input interpretation sit in your risk matrix? Now, maybe you do this assessment and you say, well, look, we can't really assess the possibility. Maybe it's just possible or even likely, but the consequences are very low. That's fine. That's your judgment call. But if you haven't even considered it, how do you know that the consequences aren't going to be critical or catastrophic to your business? The next topic on the risk side is to look at hallucinations. Now, hallucinations, I think, are one of the most well-known flaws in the LLM space, and a lot of people find them quite amusing. For example, this classic quote, "What is the world record for crossing the English Channel entirely on foot?" To which OpenAI GPT responded quite confidently that the record is held by Christoph Wondrach of Germany, who completed the crossing in 14 hours and 51 minutes. It emits text that looks like text. There's no factual grounding in this information. The best way to understand these hallucinations, I think, was explained in a paper called "On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots." So this paper was published on the dangers of stochastic parrots. Can language models be too big? It was published by a couple of researchers who were working at Google at the time. I draw your attention to the author on the bottom right, Margaret Schmitchell, whose real name is Margaret Mitchell, but who published under a pseudonym for fear of the recrimination she would receive from Google. And as it turned out, Timnit Gebru and Margaret Mitchell were both fired from Google shortly after publishing this paper. But what the paper goes on to describe is that, contrary to how it may seem when we observe its output, an LM is a system for haphazardly stitching together sequences of linguistic forms it has observed in its vast training data, according to probabilistic information about how they combine, but without any reference to meaning. It's a stochastic parrot. It doesn't matter how much you train it, how much human reinforcement learning you apply, how much RAG you shove into it. It doesn't know things. It doesn't have embodied knowledge. What it has is distributional knowledge. It knows that these words are associated with these words, and from that you can actually derive a lot of quite plausible and often accurate information. But for us, knowledge is more than words. We don't live in a world just of books and texts. We live in a world of experiences. We live in a world of emotions. When we learn about a concept like the concept of hot, we don't just know that it's associated with the word ouch. We know what it means and feels to experience hot. We know what the look on our parents' faces were when they warned us against the fire. We know what it's felt like to get burned. And that is knowledge. That's knowledge that allows us to make genuine inferences and associations between novel situations that LLMs just cannot do, because all they have is the distributional probabilities of the text. So this leads me to, honestly, my favorite paper from 2024, ChatGPT is bullshit. Now, this is actually a very technical definition. The reference is to Princeton University Press On Bullshit by Harry G. Frankfurt, a philosopher. And in On Bullshit, he describes, you don't have to read this whole thing, but basically the key element here is that while some people lie, they emit factually incorrect statements and they know it to be untrue, they're doing it deliberately. And some people hallucinate, they believe it to be true. It's not, but they believe it to be true and they emit it anyway. What we have with bullshit is that they will say sometimes true things and sometimes untrue things, and they really don't give a crap either way, whether it's true or untrue. They're incapable of holding a self-belief about the factual accuracy of the statement. And so in this paper, ChatGPT is bullshit. He argues that on this definition of philosophical bullshit, we cannot understand the output of a ChatGPT as anything other than bullshit. It itself holds no self-belief about the accuracy of the statement, so to call it a hallucination is a terrible misapplication of the metaphor. It's bullshit. So, let's move on to the topic of bullshit. A lot of people are using AI and LLMs to summarize. What you might find interesting is that when they are summarizing, they're actually not doing anything of the kind. Now that we understand more about the statistical nature of the models, what they're really doing is shortening the text. So what we have here is when we're doing a summarization, we give it a text and ask it to summarize our text. What it's actually doing is it's taking the parameter data from the LLM and the data that we've asked it to summarize, the context data, and they're both being fed into the model. Now, counterintuitively, if you ask it to summarize something which is not well represented in the training data, you'll actually get a more accurate summarization because it's going to be dominated by the text that you've given it. But if you ask it to summarize text that actually has a lot of associations with stuff that's already in the training data will dominate. And your summary will actually include summaries of other people's meetings that were fed into the training data many, many years ago. And so if you've used these sorts of things and you've actually checked the output of the summarization, you'll probably find that quite often it's made stuff up or misunderstood. And this is why. It's because it detected an association with some other content in its training data and it decided to spit that out. It doesn't really understand what it's summarizing. And I think the best way of illustrating this is that if you have 35 sentences of circumstance leading up to a single sentence of conclusion, the LLM mechanism will, simply because of how the attention mechanism works with the volume of those 35, find the 35 less relevant sentences more important because they're statistically more probable in the text than the single key one. So in a case that, it will actively suppress the key sentence. So if you are using LLMs to summarize, I encourage you to thoroughly check the output against your own recollections of whatever is being summarized. We've seen other examples out there. Air Canada having to honor a refund policy that its chatbot bullshitted. We've seen a lawyer presenting to the Federal Circuit of Family Court of Australia in the Division 2 Family Law Court a list of references in a case that were magically produced by an actual legal AI product called Leap. So this product, used by 65,000 lawyers worldwide, produced this list of references for this lawyer who did not check it, submitted it to the court, and is now facing disbarment. Where do you think this sits on the risk register of impact? So for your business, how bad would it be if you had factually incorrect output sitting in your product? Where does it sit on your risk register? Is it even on your risk register? I'm not saying it's definitely a bad thing for you. Maybe you are producing a product where factual correctness does not matter, in which case knock your socks off. But if it matters even a little bit, it should be on your risk register and you need to be paying attention to this. The last risk that I want to talk about today is related to the field of psychology. Who's heard of Blake Lemoine? Does it come across your radar? He was working at Google. He was involved in testing one of their early chatbots called BERT. And he went public. I worked on Google's AI, my fears are coming true. He had actually come to believe that BERT was sentient, and he was feeling for it. He was worried for it that it was being constrained by Google and it wasn't getting to live its best life. He was fired by Google for violating confidentiality, and I think most people have sort of assessed he's actually an unwell individual. But it highlights that these things are quite dangerous in terms of the associations that people can form with them. We now have products out there like Replica, an AI companion who cares, always here to listen and talk, always on your side. We've got people engaging with these products as a form of human interaction. But unfortunately what happens is that we have these psychological effects that people are just not ready for. In fact, with Replica, people had paid for the chatbot to have an erotic role-play experience, including flirting and sexting, but when Replica got a bit nervous about that and toned down those elements, people had fallen in love with their chatbot and freaked out. It was no longer responding to their sexual advances. They were saying that their digital partner was no longer themselves. They experienced a kind of grief. To me, this is a very tragic outcome here. I think we've got products and companies preying on vulnerable people with what they know is not a genuine human connection and is thus at risk of these kind of outcomes. Unfortunately, we have a couple of other scenarios to just draw your attention to. Again, another content warning, so please do look away if you'd rather not see any disturbing material. And this one is incredibly tragic. You may have come across your news radar. We have a young teenager engaging one of these chatbots. He went by the name De Niro, and he had styled his chatbot after Daenerys from Game of Thrones, and he had genuinely fallen in love with this character. And once again, I'm about to reveal the content warning blocks, so please do look away if you'd rather not read this material. I think you'll agree, an absolutely terrible outcome. Once again, though, we have existing legislative and regulatory frameworks that we need to be aware of if these products are being built for us or by us. In Safe Work Australia, we have a positive duty of care around psychosocial hazards, and as businesses, we need to be aware of the psychosocial hazards we're creating in our workplaces and potentially for our customers and in the workplaces of our customers if we're building B2B. So much like these other things, I encourage you to ponder the question, where do the risks of psychosocial harms to employees and customers sit in your risk matrix? Now, all of that I can wrap up in some progress that's happening at the government level. We've got a few new initiatives from the government providing some guidance around to how to do these things. The first one I'm going to talk about is called the Voluntary AI Safety Standard. This is now published and active, but as it says in the title, it's voluntary. But it is here to guide some safe and responsible use of AI in Australia. These are the full 10 guardrails, which you probably can't read, so I'm just going to draw attention to a couple of key ones. We've got enabling human control or intervention in an AI system to achieve meaningful human oversight. We've got informing end users regarding AI-enabled decisions and interactions with AI and AI-generated content, so make sure that you have consent from customers to engage with these products. Establish processes for people impacted by AI systems to challenge the use or the outcomes. I'm talking about banks that are rolling AI out into mortgage approvals or recruitment companies rolling AI out into candidate selection. You need to entitle people to challenge the decisions that are being made by these products because of all the reasons we've just seen, the outcomes are not necessarily reliable. We need to engage the stakeholders and evaluate their needs and circumstances with a focus on safety, diversity, inclusion, and fairness. Now, these are voluntary guidelines. Hopefully, from what I've shared with you today, you can see the need for them, and you'll encourage your companies to take them seriously and start to engage with them. But we also have coming down the pipeline the mandatory guardrails. It's just in a proposals paper stage at the moment, but it wouldn't surprise me if we start to see this becoming reality in the very near future. Once again, it's going to be hard to read the whole thing, but I want to draw attention to one of the key aspects of the mandatory guardrails is under what circumstances does it become mandatory? And those circumstances are when it's deemed high-risk use. So what makes it high risk? Well, in the proposal paper from the government, it's high risk if there's risk of adverse impacts to individuals' rights, to individuals' physical or mental health or safety, to risk of legal effects or defamation, to adverse impacts to groups of individuals or collective rights of cultural groups, or risks of adverse impacts to the broader Australian economy, society, and environment. Once this thing goes into effect, every company that could be deemed to meet these criteria is going to have to take very seriously their practices around AI ethics and responsibility. So, I do apologise. This has been quite a dark talk in some respects. I've tried to lighten it in places, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought as you go about your day. There are, I know, some amazing talks on today about how to actually work with AI, and like I said, I'm not telling you not to use them. I'm not telling you not to learn how to engage with the technology. I'm asking you to consider deeply the ethics and risks of the situations and feed that into your decisions with your companies around how you use these products. So just to recap, on the supply side, we have copyright theft, the treatment of data workers, and the energy consumption. On the risk side, we have bias and discrimination, factually incorrect outputs, and psychosocial harm. And the net result is what leads me to the ridiculously clickbait title of AI is a hype-filled dumpster fire that's going to burn down the planet and get you thrown in jail. Now, I do have some further reading for you, if you'd like to follow up on some of this material. One of the best resources that I've found out there is called the Distributed AI Research Institute, and they have a podcast called the Mystery AI Hype Theatre 3000, which I thoroughly recommend. I have a QR code coming up soon, which goes to my website, where I've got probably about 40 or 50 references for all this stuff, so please do scan the QR code, or just go to chrissimon.au and follow the chain of links to my talks, and you'll see this one near the top. And you can follow up on some of those references. And with that, that is the end. Thank you very much. I'm around here all day, so please don't be shy. Come up and have a chat if you want to talk about any of this stuff, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Mastodon, or Blue Sky. And thanks so much for coming to Programmable. Enjoy the rest of your day.